You guys all ready? Do you guys need a white balance? All right. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Genevieve Judge, and I serve as the Public Information Officer for the Sarasota Police Department. Today, we have brought you all together for this news conference to share new developments in a cold case homicide that occurred 30 years ago. With that, I'm going to introduce several people who are going to be speaking with you this afternoon. First will be Police Chief Bernadette DePino, followed by lead investigator on this case, Detective Anthony DeFrancisco, followed by Judith's sister, who's with us today, Karen Aaron. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to the chief.
Thank you, Genevieve. Good afternoon, everyone. 30 years ago, on July 31st, 1988, a homicide occurred in the city of Sarasota at the Booker High School campus. The victim was a 23-year-old young woman, Judith Elaine Doherty. Her sister is here with me now. I just had a nice conversation, learned that she was very close to her sister. She was a wonderful person who was very close to Judith's children. She'll explain a little bit about that, and this makes it so much more personal to share with you. The original investigation was conducted by two retired detectives who we actually have here, Larry Kimball and Bob Korch. And the current investigator is Detective Tony DeFrancisco, who has worked diligently and has worked so hard, and I'm really proud of his efforts as well as the efforts of the other team members in the Criminal Investigation Division. I'm really proud to introduce Detective DeFrancisco, who's going to speak to you about this case and the efforts that he's made to bring some closure, some justice to a family who has been grieving and praying and hoping to be able to come to a solution. And at this point, I'm going to ask Detective DeFrancisco to please come forward and share with you what the investigation's revealed.
Good afternoon. Detective Anthony DeFrancisco. I'm a detective with this agency. I'm in my 23rd year as a police officer and my 17th year as a detective. We're here to talk about Judith Elaine Doherty. On July 31st, 1988, approximately 10:30, a jogger discovered the victim's body in the field by Booker High School, which was at 3201 North Orange Avenue. The victim was lying on the ground next to her car. Judith was the victim of an extremely violent homicide, being beaten and then strangled to death. Judith was also sexually battered. The original detectives in this case conducted an extensive investigation but did not solve the case at that time. I began investigating this case several years ago, and in 2009 we sent crime scene evidence to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Laboratory to be tested and a DNA analysis conducted. The results of this analysis revealed that male DNA was obtained from the victim's body. This DNA was entered into CODIS, which is the combined DNA index system, which revealed a match to the suspect, David L. Stevens, date of birth 12/20/1955. David Stevens at the time was already incarcerated in the DeSoto Annex prison on a 70-year sentence. I later contacted David Stevens at the prison, where I conducted an interview and obtained a current sample of his DNA. This was done in order to do a direct one-on-one comparison with the DNA that had been located at the crime scene on the victim's body. The DNA match was irrefutable, very strong. It was also the DNA match was corroborated by other crime scene physical evidence linking Stevens to the murder. Let's talk for a moment about Judith. At the time of her death, Judith was a 23-year-old young woman who was very free spirit, very kind, very gentle. According to her family, she loved to be with her family. She loved ice skating, she loved bowling, and she loved her little dog, her little Shih Tzu called Chin Lee. Judith Doherty did not deserve this to happen to her. The suspect in this case, David LaRae Stevens, actually lived across the street from Booker High School at 3206 Goodrich, right across the street from the crime scene. Mr. Stevens has 8 felony convictions, which would include armed burglary with battery, sexual assault with a deadly weapon, loitering and prowling, sale of cocaine, possession of cocaine, grand theft, and that does not include the charges that we placed upon him yesterday, which is homicide and sexual battery. He is currently at the DeSoto Annex Prison and has been there since August 15th, 1989. He is there because he committed an armed burglary with an armed sexual battery. Approximately 6 to 7 months after this murder that we have been investigating, he committed this other crime just over the city line in the county. This was reference to the Sheriff's Office case number 8912027. This occurred on February 13th, 1989. Mr. Stevens at that time, in the early morning hours, broke into a home through the bedroom window with a 9-inch knife and being masked. He sexually assaulted the victim in that case at night point while her children slept in the next room. Unfortunately for him, that during this crime, he left the knife behind, which had his latent fingerprint, and they were able to identify him quickly. And now here it is, almost 30 years later, he's still in prison for that crime, but was scheduled to get out within the next 2 to 2.5 years. At this time, first of all, I'd like to thank God for this investigation, that He revealed His truth about this case to help bring healing and closure to the Doherty family after years of heartache. And we're happy for that family. That's it.
This is Judith's sister. If you would just introduce yourself to the camera and say whatever you would like to say.
My name is Karen. Aaron. Judith Elaine Doherty was my youngest sister. I was over the age of 17 the year she was born in 1964. She was a baby, and just a few years later I was married and had a child of my own. She was an auntie at the age of 3.5, and I had a second child in the next couple of years, and she was doubly thrilled. And I lived in California at that time. And when I moved home again, Judy had more time to spend with her little niece and nephew. She also came from a very large family on both sides with her mother and her father. She had a huge number of first cousins. We've lost quite a number in the last 30 years. Both of the parents of our parents are dead. It was my father, and her mother was my stepmother. A brother is gone, several cousins, and all of the aunts and uncles, but 2, very elderly and sickly, and they really can't handle all of this news at this time. But all I can say is that I am here today to represent that family that was in agony, that 30 years ago. That's a long time. The parents who never got to see closure. I remember the pain. My children's pain was great. They cried many tears. This was the auntie that they loved so much. It was close in age. And they shared time with her right up until their teens. And my son always remembers, he said, Judy was so good to me. I had so much fun with her. She was a lovely girl. She could be a little bold at times. She spoke her mind. She wasn't a fading little flower, but she was a good person with a good heart. I saw her journals, her prayers, how she would write her prayers out to the Lord, her hopes and her dreams, and when she returned to school, the effort she put into her schoolwork to finish. And I know that she had hopes and dreams for her own future. She had some issues in her life, and she was still young. She was still a fledgling. At 23, she was not really, she was a young 23 too. And to lose her at that stage was agonizing. It was a life unfinished. And I had a long conversation with her the year before. I was at my summer house, and I was opening it for the season off the coast of New England. And she called me, and I said, oh, I hope you can come down to see me. And I wish that I could invite you like this week if you're here next week, but I don't have the beds in yet. Everything's not ready. And she said, oh, don't worry. I'm just visiting everyone. And we had a very long talk. And she went from one house, one cousin, one aunt and uncle to the other. And I said afterwards, I called my sister. I have a full sister too. And I said, Judith is so mature now. She's so grown up. I'm so pleased for her. Everything she said to me made such sense. I'm so happy to hear where she is right now. In retrospect, on looking back, people thought it was as if she had come up there to say goodbye to everyone. She literally went from home to home, relative to relative. Everyone pleased to see her. She went up there with her boyfriend, and they said goodbye to everyone, and she went back to Florida, and the following year, she was gone. I'm here to represent her today, and I'm here also primarily to offer my great thanks to Detective Tony DeFrancisco for his diligence, his hard work. He never quit, and he believed. And I told him when he called me 5 years ago, I'm in shock. He and Jude Castro were together when they called me. I said to him, Tony, 8 weeks ago, I drove down to Venice, Florida, and I drove to clean the graves of my father and his wife and my sister Judith. They're buried next to each other. And I said I went there to honor my father on Father's Day. And after I cleaned the graves and I put down the flowers, I knelt down, and I'm a Catholic, and I prayed a rosary. Now, as a Catholic, I don't believe Mary is equal to God or Jesus, her son. She's an intercessor. And I know that her intercessory prayers have more power than anyone else. I could say to anyone here, would you please pray for me? But when you say it to Mary, it means a lot. I said those prayers on my knees at Judith's grave. It was 25 years then, and I said, Judy, I don't know how, I don't know when, but I promise you, before I leave this world, you will see justice. Somehow it's going to happen. I knew nothing. 8 weeks later, on the 16th of August, I get a call from Detective Tony, and he says, Karen, we've made a break. And I've had to wait and been waiting patiently, and every time I call, Jude Castro is there for me. She answers my questions. Sometimes Tony's there, and they come together and they answer what I need to know. They just have given me encouragement. But I believe it's the power of God and the power of prayer that brought this to be. I have been praying for years. I never gave up. I never stopped believing. I said, as long as there's life, there is hope. And that proved to be true. So, again, to the Sarasota Police Department, to the Chief of Police, to Jude, and especially to Tony, thank you, thank you, thank you for what you've done, because you're bringing closure and peace and healing to a family that suffered terribly. The reverberations were huge from many, many people. And there will be healing, and there will be justice for Judith Elaine Doherty. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm proud of the efforts of the men and women of our police department. We are not going to give up on cases. This is just an example of a cold case from 30 years ago that we have fine detectives like Detective DeFrancisco, who has put in a lot of time and effort and heart and passion into this investigation. We care about the families in our community, and we want to bring about justice, and we're really honored that we're able to give some sense of closure in this case. And I thank all of the detectives from the very beginning who are here. If it wasn't for how hard you worked in gathering evidence and maintaining a good crime scene and all the people that were involved all these years later, we wouldn't be where we are today to bring about this closure and hopefully satisfy the family with that. So with that, just want to remind you when you get ready to ask questions is that this is an active case that's going to go to a trial, and so there are some things that the detectives are not going to be able to specifically talk about because it is going to go to court, but we'll answer what we can. So with that, I'll open it up. Yes?
Detective, what was in the area at that time? How did this eventually all come about?
Judith, as kind and good as she was, also had a problem with drugs and had actually been clean for a while, according to her family, but had relapsed recently, which is how she ended up into the Newtown area at that location.
Yeah, you mentioned that you had started to retest that DNA back in 2009. You know, what took it to this point for charges to be filed?
When you test something for DNA, even though when you get the hit, there's so much more. That's just the beginning. That's actually the beginning of the investigation. There's a lot of work to do, and there was a lot of work to do with this case. And so much more that you can even bring out today. But it took several years of interviews and excluding people from the crime scene to get to the point where we are today.
Was Mr. Stevens always seen as a suspect?
No. Mr. Stevens, in the original investigation, was never on the radar.
What changed?
The DNA hit.
How helpful has all the advancements with DNA become? I mean, we're seeing more and more of these cold cases solved each day.
And that's just it. DNA is the key to solving many of these cold cases. Without DNA, without the testing they do now, we wouldn't be doing this. We wouldn't be having this conversation today.
How hopeful are you for other cases? I mean, it may not be murder cases, but for future cases that a family like this can also have their...
I think it's only going to get better and better as the technology improves.
What's it like for you to be able to see this through from the beginning all the way to now, 30 years later?
I'm happy for the family. That's where it's at for me. That's why I've stayed being a detective all these years. I love to work the cases. I love to help the families. That's where it is.
How do you believe that Judith and Mr. Stevens knew each other or possibly crossed paths?
I cannot answer that. That's part of the investigation, which I'm not going to get into. Certain things we just can't talk about. We still have to take this case to trial, and we need to keep the integrity of the case.
Well, that's going to conclude this press conference. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here, Karen. We appreciate it. And again, congratulations to all the investigators, especially you, Tony. Good job. Really proud of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.